The bigger a bill, the more it includes, the more difficult it is to get everybody to agree to things. I supported the tax cuts in 2017. I support making them permanent, so I support that part of the bill. I support spending cuts. I think the cuts currently in the bill are wimpy and anemic, but I still would support the bill, even with wimpy and anemic cuts, if they weren't going to explode the debt. The problem is the math doesn't add up. They're going to explode the debt by, the House says $4 trillion. The Senate's actually been talking about exploding the debt $5 trillion. This year in September, when our fiscal year ends, the deficit will be about $2.2 trillion. Now, people used to always say, the Republicans would say, what's Bidenomics? That's Biden spending levels. When March, every Republican, virtually every Republican other than me, voted to continue the Biden spending levels, which are going to give us a $2.2 trillion deficit. Now, if you increase the debt ceiling $4 to $5 trillion, that means they're planning on $2 trillion this year and more than $2 trillion next year. That's just not conservative. So I've told them if they strip out the debt ceiling, I'll consider, even with the imperfections, voting for the rest of the bill. But I can't vote to raise the debt ceiling $5 trillion. There's got to be someone left in Washington who thinks debt is wrong and deficits are wrong and wants to go in the other direction. The idea that we're going to explode deficits, and the projections are now looking at over $3 trillion in deficits over the next 10 years, I think is just, not a serious proposal.
So the debt ceiling is going to come sooner or later, and Republicans, many of them, and those who advocate for including the debt ceiling being raised within this measure say, take it off the table now, because otherwise you're going to have really knockdown, drag-out fights with Democrats further down the road. They're going to have more leverage when you're facing that debt ceiling. So do you cede something by taking it out of this bill and leaving it for further debates that may be to Democrats' advantage down the road?
Well, they want to take it out of this bill because it is a walk of shame. Every time the debt ceiling raises, the people who've been voting for the spending have to walk in shame to the front of the House or the front of the Senate and say, yes, I've been voting for all these deficit spending, and now I'm willing to vote to raise the debt ceiling. But I would say the opposite. I offered an amendment 2 weeks ago to raise the debt ceiling for 3 months. That's $500 billion, believe it or not, for 3 months. And the reason I do it every 3 months and force the vote is it's a point of leverage. It's an inflection point at which we can look back at leadership and said, you promised you were going to cut spending. Oh, you promised tomorrow. You promised next week. You promised next year. But you know what? You're not doing it, so I'm not going to raise it again. So this leverage would work. If you do it for 2 years, you're right. It goes through all the elections, goes on the back burner, and the debt accumulates like it always had. This is more of the same. This is what the Democrats have always done, and this is the Republicans using the same playbook.
Okay, let's talk about things where some of your GOP colleagues there in the Senate are worried about too many cuts to specific programs. They're worried about impact on Medicaid. They're worried about SNAP. And really this idea that if you add work requirements or make it tougher to access those assistance programs, millions of people could be thrown off of health insurance. They could lose their access to food and medical coverage and insurance. So as a physician yourself, where do you stand on those arguments?
Well, see, on the one hand, you can offer people free stuff. You can say, I'll give you free health care. And people are, oh, thank you for free health care. But what you don't tell them is we're borrowing the money from China to pay for your health care. So we run a deficit, $2 trillion, which leads to inflation, which leads to rising prices, which squeezes you on the other side. So the bottom line is there is no free lunch. You can offer people free stuff, but if you're borrowing money to do it, you end up punishing them with inflation. The same people that are getting the free stuff are also being punished by inflation and never seem to creep out of poverty or climb up out of poverty. So it's a bait and switch. It isn't good. But I do think the deficit is a threat to our country. I think it's the greatest threat to our national security. And so I think you can't do this. We bring in about $5 trillion in revenue, and we spend $7 trillion. That's about what we do. The $5 trillion is consumed by Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, and other welfare programs. The mandatory programs consume all of it. So the people say, well, we're taking this off the table and we're not going to touch any of those programs. Well, they're just not, frankly, serious. I'm all for the DOGE cuts, and I'll vote for every one of them. But, the administration now is afraid to send them back because Republican leadership on both sides is saying, we're not sure we can pass a $9 billion cut. And so what we're really stuck with is the math doesn't work. All the great DOGE stuff, all the great stuff Elon Musk has done is out there. And people are going to wake up in about 2 months and say, how come the deficit's still $2.2 trillion? Where did the savings go? people are going to be very disappointed, conservatives, and I'm the one ringing the alarm saying they're not doing anything. They're not sending us a rescission package. They're not cutting spending. Somebody has to stand up and yell, the emperor has no clothes, and everybody's falling in lockstep on this. Pass the big, beautiful bill. Don't question anything. Well, conservatives do need to stand up and have their voice heard. This is a problem we've been facing for decades now, and if we don't stand up on it, I really fear the direction the country is going.
Had it say, now Senate Republicans specifically will get a crack at President Trump's so-called big, beautiful bill, a spending cut and tax cut legislation. My next guest says in no uncertain terms that he will not vote for what the House passed unless there are major changes. Joining us now, Republican Senator Ron Johnson of the great state of Wisconsin. Senator, thanks so much for being here. So you just heard Speaker Johnson. He said this bill is a serious attempt to address the deficit and the debt and have the economy grow. On a scale of 1 to 10, how serious do you think this House-passed legislation actually is when it comes to reining in the debt?
Well, first of all, let me say I have nothing but respect for Speaker Johnson. I understand and sympathize with the challenge he has. I have, nothing but support for what President Trump is trying to do. I love the way he's acting boldly and swiftly, decisively to fix the enormous messes left by the Biden administration. So, from my standpoint, this is a budget reconciliation process, so we ought to talk about numbers. One of my disappointments with what the House process is about, the only number we ever heard about was $1.5 trillion, which sounds like a lot, but it's only $150 billion per year. And this is put in context of the fact that in 2019, we spent $4.4 trillion. This year we'll spend over $7 trillion. $150 billion on that is basically a rounding error.
Yeah, you're talking about
the spending cuts. So we need to get serious about this. We need to establish goals. Listen, this is the weekend we honor the service and sacrifice of the finest among us. More than 1 million that died to defend this nation. I don't think they served and sacrificed to leave our children completely mortgaged, their future and their prospects diminished because of it. So we need to be responsible. The first goal of our budget reconciliation process should be to reduce the deficit. This actually increases it. But let me describe the mess. President Obama averaged about $910 billion of deficits per year. President Trump in his first 3 years averaged about 810. Then COVID hit, over $3 trillion in deficit. It should have ended there. We should have immediately returned to a pre-pandemic level spending, but President Biden averaged $1.9 trillion of deficits over his 4 years. And according to CBO, those deficits now average $2.2 trillion over the next 10 years. We'll add $22 trillion. And I'm sorry, the House bill would probably add, I've calculated $4 trillion. You're saying you have these independent analysts saying it's 3.3 to 4 trillion. I agree with that. We have to reduce the deficit, and so we need to focus on spending.
Ad that says, "I know y'all want to go to Disney World, but we can't afford it. I guess I'm going to be that guy." Unquote. So, how determined are you to be that guy if it actually means telling President Trump you are going to vote against the bill and you're going to try to get other Republican senators to join you unless there are major changes?
Well, in 2010, I sprang out of the Tea Party movement, and as I did parades, I would shout, "This is a fight for freedom. We are mortgaging our children's future. It's wrong. It's immoral. It has to stop." I haven't changed. My campaign promise in 2010 and every campaign after that was to stop mortgaging our children's future. It's immoral. It's wrong. It has to stop. And so he may not be worried about that. I am extremely worried about that. That is my primary goal running for Congress. This is our moment. We've witnessed an unprecedented level of increased spending, 58% since 2019, other than World War II. This is our only chance to reset that to a reasonable pre-pandemic level of spending. And again, I think you can do it, and the spending that we would eliminate, people wouldn't even notice. But you have to do the work, which takes time. That's part of the process. Part of the problem here is we've rushed this process. We haven't taken the time. We've done it the same old way, exempt most programs, take a look at a couple, tweak them a little bit, try and rely on a CBO score, and then have that score completely out of context with anything that, really we ought to be talking about, like the $22 trillion of additional deficit over the next 10 years.
So we're out of time, but I'm just wondering if you could just give me a number. How many other Republican senators do you think share your concerns and are willing to make major changes to this bill?
I think we have enough to stop the process until the president gets serious about spending reduction and reducing the deficit.
Senator Ron Johnson, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for being here, and I hope you have a peaceful and meaningful Memorial Day.
You too.
My next guest is a Democratic senator running for governor of a purple state.
Our iPhones, I guess we're still allowed to have our iPhones out. Everyone has, most people in this country have an iPhone, whether or not it's an iPhone or Samsung or a smartphone. That's going to be a direct corollary impact if he stays with this. And I just, like, it's an open question I have. If iPhones go to $3,000, like, is Donald Trump going to keep that 25% demand in there?
Yeah.
And that's just, I throw it up to the table, or maybe I should ask my phone. But it's just an open question to me whether or not he ever cries uncle.
And I think it's also the question is, what does he exactly want? What is he trying to get at? Because is he truly trying to move manufacturing to the U.S.? But if that's the case, why does he then look for a deal? And he says, oh, I brought these countries to the table. So are you trying to just get the countries to come pleading and begging, wanting to come up with some type of agreement that lowers the tariffs but still is higher than where they started? What exactly are we getting at? And I think consumers are starting to realize that no matter what, it's still going to result in higher prices. But sometimes it comes across that what Donald Trump wants is just these countries to come begging. He doesn't necessarily have a business output or a true goal in mind for the country. He just wants the countries to come begging.
And we'll see how he adjusts as the midterms draw closer and prices increase if they, in fact, do.
You can see that Trump's, weaponization of power is coming up on some roadblocks. And it's coming up on some roadblocks in the court and also from Republican senators who, for a variety of reasons, have issues with the bill. Now, some don't want to see harsh cuts to Medicare, Medicaid, some of the social programs. Medicaid in particular is a bigger part of this one. But Medicaid in particular, they don't want to see that because they worry about election results. So you've seen Josh Hawley, who's a very right-wing senator, but he's taken a few economically centrist positions, relatively so, and he doesn't want to see any cuts to Medicaid, right? So for him, at least the bill as it exists, that's a no. But then you have the more stridently right-wing senators, and some of them are at least somewhat principled in their hyper-conservatism, and they really do think that it's an irresponsible bill because it raises the deficit too much. And it's like, as a fiscal conservative, I am rejecting Trump's abuse of power to just basically say that the Republican Party's philosophy is meaningless and blah, 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 blah. And so that's why you see Rand Paul and Ron Johnson, which is interesting because he's more MAGA. Rand Paul has always been sort of skeptical of Trump, right? He's been more of the anti-establishment wing of the party, but not so much the MAGA wing. And what you're seeing here then is prominent Republican senators, in addition to all of the Democratic senators, come out and make it clear that they're against this bill as it exists. And will something ultimately pass? I mean, probably. I mean, the United States has to have a budget at some point. Like, a budget bill does need to pass at some point. But this bill, as designed, I guarantee you will not pass. Will the changes be minor? Will they be major? Will they be somewhere in between? Maybe. But they are rejecting the bill as it is for being simultaneously too conservative and not conservative enough. And that's a bad place for Trump to be.